Hello and welcome to this video. This is a response to Vince Venturella's topic of the week. I'll post a link to that video down below. And as always, check that out if you want to see other responses or the original video. But the topic is about basing. Vince has some concerns about what he wants to do with a new army that's upcoming. And his models are always very beautifully based. But it's always something to consider. And personally, basing has always been a very controversial subject for me. In many ways, I absolutely hate basing models. It's just a different type of hobby to everything else that we do, in my opinion. But I've talked about basing models on my channel probably too much, partly because it's a pet peeve to some extent. And clearly I'm somewhat ironically obsessed by the topic because I talk about it so much, and I just couldn't pass on responding to Vince's topic of the week. So this video will briefly discuss my thoughts on basing models, and then lay out my basing plans for AOS and 40k. And I know that that's super exciting, right? Alright, so my thoughts on bases are somewhat similar to my attitude towards display boards. But whereas a display board is optional, models do require some sort of base. You must base models. So when I see an army that has beautiful bases, I can appreciate the skill and the dedication necessary to really immerse the model in a custom environment. But it's just not my interest. I don't want to invest in a project that utilizes unique skills and materials like cork and styrofoam beyond those that are really offered by the traditional retailer, like Games Workshop. Some people really like making terrain, and I think there's a crossover between the skills in terrain making and bases. I mean, bases are just small pieces of terrain, in my opinion. And if that's really what you're interested in, that's fantastic. I don't have any problem with what other people enjoy. I certainly want a robust collection of terrain kits, but I'm not interested in making my own. I'm fairly critical of my painted models. There's always a part of me that absolutely hates them. But I must say that I hate my bases above all. I've tried 3 or 4 different types of basing. It's just none of them, I just can't get behind any of them. I just think that they all look mediocre at best. Honestly, it's a problem because I feel as though they're too crudely constructed or way too plain. And I don't have a general larger strategy that just kind of the personality I have, but I feel like I must have that type of cohesive plan. And I just don't like the ones that I've worked with. And so I have, as I said, had, when I look back at my collection, just even the past couple of years of the armies I painted, there are like 3 or 4 different basing strategies that I've tried. Like I said, I don't like any of them. I have one for like the Beastmen, one for the Slanesh. My Wanderers and Cadians have like the exact same one. It's just kind of annoying to me. They look okay, but they're definitely not something that I want to continue to do. So, unlike painting models, I have very little aspiration to put the effort into making something more beautiful or elaborate. I want bases that are fairly simple, but that have a cohesive strategy. And I want them to basically just look decent. I want them to look good, but I don't really want to put a ton of effort into. I'm willing to raise my effort to some degree, but not to a significant amount. So I thought about using the Shattered Dominion and Sector Imperialis bases made by Games Workshop to solve my basing woes. Right? It's a simple strategy to kind of buy the pre-molded bases. And at one point, I thought the cost would be too high. and I wasn't quite sold on their aesthetic. I think it's how they're sometimes painted on the boxes. I think that they highlight the detail but make them appear too outlandish. And I even bought a few boxes to look at the product firsthand. I just wasn't quite sold on the concept at the time. The cost was something I was really strongly thinking about. I have a lot of armies and a lot of models. It's a significant investment. However, after thinking about it for a while, really almost a year or so, I think I finally committed to the transition. The bases don't seem too popular. I mean, I've seen the odd unit or squad based in White Dwarf or something like that. I haven't seen a full army based on them. And for that reason alone, I'm somewhat of a nonconformist. So if it's something that people aren't doing, it's something I'm a little bit more interested in. And so for that reason alone, I thought it'd be a way to make my armies stand out even more. So I made the jump, and when I painted my Khorne Demon army for Holy Havoc last November, I rebased the army on the Shattered Domain bases. And I'll likely do my 40k armies on the Sector Imperialis bases. And, you know, as an added bonus, I'm someone that does own well, at least one of the early boards by Games Workshop. Those are the hard plastic boards in 6 pieces, and those bases do match those as well, so that's kind of a bonus. As I said, there's some costs involved, but I can sell my excess round bases that I get, and one project can really lead into another. For instance, when I rebased my Bloodletters for Holy Havoc, they're all in 32 millimeters, and I need to buy, a fair amount of those. But the boxes that have the 32 millimeters also have a large number of 25 millimeter, and they're perfect for my Free People army that I'll be working on. And so basically I bought boxes for one army and really had enough for 2. And some people do need round bases if they're rebasing them in 8th edition army or something like that. So, you know, it's a small, I can probably sell, as I said, those round bases and recoup some of the costs there. But to be honest, it hasn't, Warhammer is such an expensive hobby. I buy most of my things through a retailer that does provide a discount. So it's nice now to maybe save some money on the models and maybe put that towards the bases, something like that. So personally, I see one of the challenges of basing in AOS is developing a cohesive collection. Vince made a good point about how the models or the bases that you have will never really match the table. Some people are a little bit afraid of making really elaborate bases that might be only suitable for certain types of tables. Like if you do bases that are covered in snow or something like that, how many tables do you actually play on that have snow? But his point being is that you almost never find that perfect matchup, and most of the time you have the models, they're just maybe in a cabinet or something like that, 95 or 99% of the time. I own many armies that have never been on the tabletop at all, so it's I can completely relate to that. And so I think that's something that makes sense. But even in a display cabinet, I think it'd be nice to have some sort of cohesiveness. And there are a lot of factions whose fate seems uncertain. In recent months, others have been condensed and combined. Whether you're talking about a Khorne or Nurgle, or the new book focused on the Death armies. And of course, you can have allies and mixed forces within a single army. So rather than having maybe a very distinctive basing for my Wanderer army and a different one for my Stormcast army, for instance, and if I ever use those together, it's not that big of a deal, but they do look slightly different with completely different bases. I don't mind if the painting, obviously the painting will be different. You can have, greens or browns for wanderers and, whatever paint scheme you went with the Stormcast. But it'd be nice to have some sort of coherent theme to mix allies without having that type of concern at all. And so I want a basing scheme that has a cohesive look across each of the 4 Grand Alliances, but that still has room for some customization between the various factions. So likewise in 40k, I'm interested in something that has maybe a coherent theme for all Imperial armies, all the Chaos armies, and all the Alien armies. And I'm going to achieve this is my plan, by picking a coherent color for each alliance and maintaining that color as a theme on the bases for every army within those categories. So this is still a work in progress, and there are a few decisions to be made, but the concept might look something like this. The Order armies will be basically like a light gray, the Chaos are a dark gray, Destruction light brown, and Death dark brown. The 40k bases tend to be partially metallic, so I'm thinking of using different shades of metal. The Imperial might be light metal, again, very similar to the AOS. Chaos would be kind of dark metal, and the alien races might be kind of rusted or brown. The base edges will be universally black, I think. In my years in the hobby, I've seen Goblin green bases, and I've experimented base edging with browns and grays. I really think the grays on my models, this is like my Tomb Kings and my Wanderers, they just don't look good. It's too much of a light shade of gray, and I just kind of prefer the simple black. So I'm going to kind of do that as a universal theme. So to make each of the individual armies a little bit more unique, there are some details I'm going to add to still make them each different. So within my Chaos armies, for instance, there would still be a standard dark gray, as with all Chaos armies, and according to my plan. But there would still be some highlights of green, red, and blue, maybe depending if the model was Khorne, Nurgle, or Tzeentch. So here are some of the bases I did for Holy Havoc. This is the Khorne army that I did. And there are a few red highlights, some splashes of blood, and blood in the deepest parts of the base. I really like it. And I think, again, so if I did a Nurgle, I would do highlights that are green, or use a technical paint in those recesses. However, I'm going to really push future bases a little further. I'm not going to go back and do much with these, but I think that there's room to push them to a slightly higher standard. So one of the things I'm going to do going forward is adding just a little bit of sand or grit. Again, the color will be fairly consistent, but I think it'll just help with some of the details in the bases. There are parts of these bases that can be very repetitive in large numbers. It'd be nice to partially obscure or cover some of those details. So it just kind of ensures that they don't look like they're all the exact same. And I freely recognize that some armies deserve those extra details, and I don't want to rule out unique features in my basing plan. So if I paint my Space Wolf army at some point, I might add some snow to, they're traditionally from their home world, which is a planet of ice and snow, so that makes sense that some of their bases would have some of that, and it matches their armor really well, that kind of light gray. And if I paint my Catagen army, I want some a green added to the base. Additional skulls might be used to decorate the armies of death, or might opt for different types of sand or grit. Some of these kits also come with little mushrooms in one of the basing kits, and I think that'd be obviously good for like Moon Clan Grots or something like that. But even then, I think only about 60 to 80% of the base would be covered with one of these extra features. And in that sense, the cohesive color of the overall alliance will be maintained. So One of the things I look at in the Shadespire game are the bases for those models, and they are all fairly unique, uniquely based. But I think that there's definitely ways to still use the same color palette and connect all those models together. So that's the general scheme, and we'll see how it works going forward. I know it's just boring bases, but I'm excited by this concept. Provides me some direction and answers many of the concerns that I have with basing. It's just a simpler way for me to do it, and I was happy with the results I received for Holy Havoc. A couple of people commented that they liked the bases, and that's certainly, I've never got a compliment on that. So these bases will eventually go up print, obviously. I'm always thinking long term, so that's something that on the back of my mind. But I still think that the overall strategy will work, providing my basic color choices are viable and I can maintain that over time. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Have a good one.